In this video, I'm going to be comparing the Back to the Future franchise to the Narnia franchise. In each case, you have three movies. When you look at the highest score for each franchise, in the case of Narnia, the first movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, has the highest score of 75%. In the case of Back to the Future, the first movie has the highest score of 93%. Back to the Future wins here. Then when you look at lowest score, in the case of Back to the Future, Part 2 has the lowest score of 63%. In the case of Narnia, Voyage of the Dawn Treader has the lowest score of only 50%. Back to the Future wins here. Then when you look at average, Back to the Future has an average of 79. Narnia has an average of 63. Back to the Future wins again. Then when you look at gap between lowest and highest score, in the case of Back to the Future, you have a gap of 30%. In the case of Narnia, you have a gap of 25%. So Narnia wins this round, but Back to the Future already won 3 rounds, so it's going to win this debate regardless of my personal opinion. But let's look at that now. Which franchise do I prefer? In the case of Back to the Future, I think that Part 1 and Part 3 are both fantastic. And then I still like Part 2. I still have fun with it. I enjoy it. But I don't think it's as good as the other two movies. Because I think that, for one, the filmmakers didn't really know what to do with Jennifer in this movie. So Jennifer initially goes along with Marty and Doc to the future. But then pretty quickly, Doc puts her to sleep, and she's asleep for a good amount of the movie. And then when she wakes up, she goes to the McFly house, runs into her future self, passes out again, and then she and Marty are back together at the end of the movie. So she doesn't do much at all. And then when you think about the hoverboard chase that you see in part 2, you realize, wait a minute, this is the exact same thing that we already saw in part 1, with the only difference being hoverboard versus skateboard. Also, when it comes to the part of the movie where Marty and Doc end up in alternate 1985, the dark version of the timeline where Biff is in control of everything, 3 different times we get it explained to us that old Biff from the future gave the almanac to his past self, which completely changed history. And I'm like, okay, that's repetitive. Also, when you get to the end, you have Marty and Doc literally going back to the events of the first film. Between that and the fact that you get a hoverboard chase that's so similar to the chase from the original movie, just feels like, okay, this Back to the Future movie doesn't have as much of its own identity. It's not as different, unique, or distinct as the other two movies. It's less that it's doing its own thing, more that it's leeching off the other two movies for the most part. Not that there's nothing creative about Back to the Future Part 2 at all. I think the visual look of the future version of 1985, which you see at the beginning of the movie, is really interesting. The idea of this alternate dark version of 1985, I think, is interesting. Looking at the idea of what would happen if Biff Tannen suddenly became rich and powerful. The answer is things got really bad. But I think that part 1 and part 3 each are distinct. In the case of part 3, I like that this movie actually takes us to the Wild West, so it takes us to a pretty different point in time. And I think it wraps up this trilogy in a way that feels right, in a way that feels satisfying. In the case of the Narnia franchise, I would say that Voyage of the Dawn Treader is weaker than Prince Caspian, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think there are two major things holding this third movie back. First of all, in this case, the villain is just nebulous green mist that tempts people. So it's more that, oh, there's evil out there, rather than, oh, there's this person that's a threat. When you think about Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the villain is Jadis, the White Witch. And the movie makes it clear she is an urgent threat because she's made it so Narnia is always in winter, but there's never Christmas. You can tell that she's evil. In the case of Prince Caspian, the Telmarines and Miraz are the villains, and well, you can tell that they are a threat because they've taken over Narnia. We also see right at the beginning that they destroyed a Cair Paravel, this great castle. And then you get to Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and you feel like, okay, there's not as much urgency as there was before. There's not as much tension as there was before, because all the villains just did nebulous green mist. That's it. Also, two of our main characters here, Lucy and Edmund, don't actually have any growth or development in Voyage of the Dawn Treader. So it's more like, for me, oh, this movie is a fun, lighthearted, simple, entertaining adventure in the world of Narnia, which I enjoy. I don't think it's a bad movie, just not as strong. I think that Prince Caspian is an interesting sequel. It takes things in a darker direction, where you have the Pevensey kids, four of them, coming back to the magical land of Narnia after actually a long time has passed in the world of Narnia. Things have changed a lot, to the point where these great kings and queens are now seen as legends because they were gone for so long and then they finally come back. I really enjoy Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the Pevensey kids discovering the world of Narnia. The first time, it's pretty interesting. So when it comes to which franchise I prefer, this is an interesting one because in both cases, if you have two great movies and one that's just not as good, but between them, I would say that I prefer Back to the Future, simply because it's a bit more iconic, it's a bit more memorable, and the Back to the Future movies are classic sci-fi time travel movies. I don't think the Narnia movies are classic in the same way. They're movies I certainly have nostalgia for, because I have read all the Narnia books, whereas I haven't read any Back to the Future books. I don't know if there even are any, but I would say that I like Back to the Future a bit more. That'll wrap things up for this video.